This video is an expression of my general thoughts on Season of Defiance. The footage is general gameplay as opposed to anything specific, so you can feel free to listen to this like a podcast. I also don't really talk about Guardian games, although I think it's really good, and its reward generosity should be extended to the rest of the game. It helps that the title and Taraxipos are both very satisfying weapons to fire. Anyway, let's go. The premise of Season of Defiance is simple. The Shadow Legion has assaulted Earth in addition to Neomuna, and have landed pyramids in the European Dead Zone and Cosmodrome, while also having shot down Amanda Holliday's ship somewhere in the EDZ. They've taken prisoners as well, so Marasov has granted the Guardian an Awoken scepter and blessed them with her favors, while also naming them an honorary Queen's Guard, a level of respect quite new for her given her former disdain of Guardians. Perhaps Crow's rebirth as a Lightbearer influenced this. Guardians then attack 3 Defiant Battlegrounds alongside Mizrax, Earth's defenders, and the Awoken in order to free the prisoners. So let's start with gameplay. Strand is the biggest addition of Destiny that came with Lightfall and Season of Defiance. It's our newest subclass. Threadrunner, Broodweaver, and Berserker now exist for Hunter, Warlock, and Titan respectively, and this new element as a whole has been really well enjoyed by the player base, me included. While it's fun to play with in general, Strand is mainly characterized by having a lot of ways to control enemies, even more so than Stasis. We have more snares, stuns, and enemy damage reduction in this element than anything else in the game. This makes Strand especially loved by endgame or high difficulty players. Guardians who are playing hard content and want to crowd control threatening foes like champions or groups that will swarm you find a lot of value in this subclass. It also comes with an armor buff we can apply to ourselves called Woven Mail, which is completely ridiculous in the amount of damage resistance it gives you, and this buff alone was likely responsible for the across-the-board resilience system nerf. If Tier 10 resilience was the pre-Lightfall version, and Woven Mail existed in the game at this same time, we would essentially be unkillable, so its adjustment makes sense. I don't have too much to say about the artifact except for one system change that I think is amazing. Instead of unlocking artifact mods and then having to waste slots in your armor to equip them, you unlock artifact perks, which are passives that are always working for you in the background. You can only have 12 perks equipped at a time for balancing reasons, so you can't just get everything at once, but that's still enough to lean into one of the 3 elemental directions this season offers, which are Void, Solar, and Strand. Void is probably the most immediately useful here. Volatile Flow grants volatile rounds just for picking up an Orb of Power, which is the most passive form of activating volatile I've ever seen in this game. And on something like a Funnel Web, Commemoration, Retrofit Escapade, Hollow Denial, or Le Monarch, it's pretty insane, especially considering this is exotic agnostic, so you don't even need something like Gyrfalcons or whatever. It's also very fun on Quickfang, the Hunter Void Sword, which I've already made a video on. Bricks from Beyond is another Void perk that makes kills with Void weapons on enemies, especially challenging enemies, have a high chance to drop a heavy ammo brick. This is insane. It basically just gives you free ammo for killing stuff with a weapon element you probably have empowered from your artifact already. And finally, Shattering Orb spawns an Orb of Power for breaking a shield with a matching element. And although this is not specific to Void, the reason I slot it under the Void section is because in Defiant Battlegrounds, Void shields are what you will find most often, to the point that shattering one Void shield cascades the break effect to the auras of all nearby enemies, generating absurd amounts of orbs for minimal effort. It's truly wild the number of orbs you can generate with this season's Void artifact perks and a Void Siphon mod. Solar I didn't try out too much except on Warlock when I briefly played it in Iron Banner, just so I could speed up my Iron Lord title. I'm typically a one-trick, but I will, with extreme rarity, play other classes on occasion in order to finish something that my Hunter lacks access to, like getting a title or collecting class-specific craftable weapons, because I'm a little obsessive about getting every pattern. The only thing I've really taken away from Solar this season is that Firebolt grenades are completely unholy in PvP. If you want more information on that, just search PvP Firebolt Destiny 2 on YouTube and enjoy the suffering. Strand, I'm sure is great, but I didn't use it much, just because for me Void was too absurd not to spec into, volatile rounds are just such a pleasant buff to use so effortlessly, and Strand was already strong enough without me artifacting into it. The Strand perks do give you some fun interactions with tangles and unraveling rounds though. Of course, the artifact's first row also has the classic anti-champion weapon perks, but this is where I'll briefly talk about the new champion counter system, which feels really cool. Now, there are many ways to counter champions using subclass verbs, and critically, these subclass verbs don't necessarily have to come from abilities, like in the case of something like Chokelip or Weapon Ignitions. Before Lightfall, the ways to stun champions were to either use an anti-champ mod for a weapon on your bracers, or use an exotic weapon that had an intrinsic anti-champion function, like Le Monarch for Overload, Wishender for Barrier, or Leviathan's Breath for Unstoppable. I know those are all bows, I just wanted to roll with the pattern. Now, we can stun champions using our abilities as well, and with Strand's Suspend effect entering the game, champions are basically invalidated completely, provided you have a weapon that can overload. Suspend lasts such a long time, you will probably kill whatever is strung up. It stuns Unstoppable by itself, it prevents Barrier from ever putting its shield up, and it keeps Overload from moving and warping around, so all you have to do is pop it with Overload rounds to stop it from healing and disrupt it. Overall, a truly amazing change, one of the best quality of life improvements to the entire game, especially because of the enhanced freedom it gives you to play your character the way that you want. I don't have too much to say about the new mod system, except that it feels at this point in time somewhat unfinished and like it's lacking in special sauce, but that might just be the more obtuse nature of the previous system shrouding what was actually possible and making it seem more advanced than it was, with the exception of a few notable losses here which really hurt, like some stasis stuff. Overall, the mod's rework is very comfy, very fast and smooth to use. It's really easy to understand for new players and veterans alike, and the new mod setup screen to the right of our character screen is a really fast way to quickly look at this part of your build at a glance. In some ways, mods now are quite liberating compared to what came before, because certain restrictions like having to use specific slots are now completely lifted. The only real restrictions that remain are 1. Certain mods can only go on certain armor, like helmet, arms, and so on, or 2, you have to abide by your energy capacity, which we had to do before anyway. What I really love about this system is that it's so easy to teach. With mods before, I found it difficult to get newer players and myself when I was first starting to see and understand what powered certain playstyles, why it was even fun to come up with something, and then just play to its strengths. With this new system, for all its faults, I can instantly tell a player what certain mods do for them, and why they would want to use them, and have them immediately understand the overall direction of a build or playstyle, which causes far fewer headaches for both myself and them. However, some mods are completely removed, like Seeking Wells, because everything has been replaced by orbs, and Elemental Shards, because again, Elemental Wells no longer exist. While this is mostly fine, this does mean certain playstyles are either weaker or totally impossible now. For the easiest example, see Stasis, which now has fewer ways to regenerate resources, and is basically forced into running font mods that boost a stat while you have armor charge. Speaking of everything being orbs and orb generation being more accessible, this also means people on average have their supers up a lot more often, and they're able to access healing and armor charge more often, and generally get access to any mechanic that you would trigger by eating an orb more often. Overall, this consolidation feels pretty smooth. You can now heal, get super energy, increase your grenade recharge rate, make your gun do more damage, get volatile rounds, whatever you want, all at the same time, just for picking up a single orb. Combine that with how many orbs you can generate nowadays, and you can get a feel for how the overall speed of the game has increased, because you're getting back all of your resources so much faster. Unless you're stasis, but that'll be addressed in future seasons by the looks of it. I'll talk about Defiant Battlegrounds now, which is the main seasonal activity. Let's start by discussing Awoken Favors, which is one of the player side mechanics here that speeds up your ability casting rates. Killing enemies in certain ways spawns Awoken Favors, which are blessings from Mara's Solve to the Guardians. Walking into one of these immediately applies its benefit to your character. Mara is and has magic, so the seasonal mechanic she gives you is logically magic heavy, giving you more of your spells back instantaneously to spam over and over. An element of randomness as to how often favors are genned, and that different ones can be genned, incentivizes players to rotate weapon slots between special and heavy, and remember to slay using abilities in order to generate favors consistently. A fun loop to stay conscious of considering ad density. To generate favors, you need to have that favors upgrade unlocked and repeatedly kill enemies in certain ways. Heavy ammo kills drop a favor that refills your grenade. Special ammo kills drop a favor that boosts your mobility, and ability kills drop a favor that refills your melee. Playing around favors can be a fun extra thing to think about, since if your melee is full, you should probably just throw it into a group of enemies before picking up the melee favor, and so on, just so you don't waste the refresh. Especially early on, Defiant Battlegrounds were quite hard. Players in matchmaking would die often, especially in certain rooms or parts of them that we learned to recognize as very death-heavy. Problematic units like snipers were placed in spots that players early in the season never even seemed to know about, since often I was the one that had to kill these enemies while blueberries ignored them. Ad density means players can get swarmed in certain rooms as well, but ad density in general is every Battleground's main trait as a gameplay space, so this is nothing new, just good that it's maintained. In every battleground, clearing foes around critical points in the final boss lets Guardians ignite Balefires. These become sanctuary against the Witness's dark Fetor, a foul fog that saps the life from you steadily the longer you stay inside. You can become immune to dark Fetor by staying in a Balefire's AoE, but also by grabbing a taken essence from special enemies in these boss rooms, which gives you enough time to run back to a Balefire without getting dotted down by the very air around you. Consecrating taken essence inside a Balefire turns it into a shield cracker projectile that can be used to give yourself a damage window on the boss at the end of each battleground. This all creates an interesting feeling where at least one player is always likely to be chilling inside a Balefire at any given time, defending that safe haven from incoming enemies who can and will walk inside of it or try to flank around it. The Balefire keeps you safe from the environment, but not from the enemies who can still shoot you or batter you, so a player staying there to keep it safe for their allies is a pattern most teams will naturally fall into. From there needs to be at least one player who ventures out into the hostile outside of the bubble in order to collect the taken essence. Most often this was me, because I run Assassin's Cowl most of the time in all content, and being able to both heal and be invisible at the same time makes these dangerous expeditions much safer and faster. Once the boss is damaged enough, players push up to the next Balefire and repeat the process until the next damage window, and when the boss dies they get to use a Defiant key to get bonus loot from the chest at the end. It's simple, it's pretty well paced, and it'll check you hard enough that you'll probably die if you don't take certain rooms seriously, which keeps it engaging. Now, about that loot from the chest at the end. I have things to say about this too, and about the general progression loop of Defiance. This section is about Season of Defiance's reward structure, and is going to be a whole bunch of gibberish for non-Destiny players, so you have my permission to skip to the next section that doesn't talk about rewards or loot, or just skip to wherever you want. I don't want to bore you, but I do want to talk about this and get my thoughts out. The Engram tracker is a new inventory item Bungie added that lets you track engrams from any vendor that would otherwise clog up the engram pane in the right side of your inventory. This change comes alongside gear focusing changes, which are mostly quite comfy. The big one I really like being that engrams are now stored in the top right of vendor screens, and they just chill there as focusing material unless you deliberately claim them, which rolls them into something random. I find this quite an elegant system, though the rate at which we get engrams now and how many engrams it takes to focus something feels stingy and dry. It can make going for anything deliberately very exhausting, especially if you want to focus gear from core playlists like Vanguard and Crucible, which to most players are already boring enough. Since different vendors focus gear using their own engram type, and since Defiance introduces seasonal ones in Defiant engrams, this means Umbrals no longer have a reason to exist, and so they don't. I think once they figure out a rate of acquisition that feels better to players, Umbrals being deleted is ultimately a good change. In previous seasons, Umbrals dropping was completely random, so you couldn't influence it except to just hope you got some as you played, so several players I talked to found themselves lacking them in moments they needed them, while others would have way too many, because remember, Umbrals clogged up engram storage and inventory, which is also where primes would go, and that wasn't exactly a ton of space, which was irritating. With vendor engrams and seasonal engrams being used to focus gear nowadays, you have a clear direction to go in when you want to purposefully farm something, which feels very good since you can play with intention. Defiant keys are the new seasonal currency, and they're also a lot comfier and less aggravating to use than currencies in previous seasons. Before, you would get currency for just doing stuff in the soul system, killing enemies, finishing activities. It would stockpile up to like 2,000 usually, but if you didn't have enough to interact with a chest or reward object at the end of an activity, you would just feel kinda deflated, and it was tough sometimes at a glance to see how many times you could get boosted rewards from something. This was especially true because you could get those currencies to drop for you while you were playing the activities themselves, so players would sometimes get risky with it if they had almost enough to grab boosted rewards again, playing the activity hoping they would get enough currency to drop before they killed the boss in order to dip into the bonus chest at the end. It was messy and, to me, unsatisfying. Defiant keys, meanwhile, stack up to a maximum of 5. You only really get them at the end of activities or from encounter chests. You can instantly see how many you have, and there is no separate chest to interact with at the end of a battleground. There's just the one, and grabbing your loot from it will use a key if you have one, or won't if you don't. Elegant, smooth, good stuff. If you play the Legend version of Battlegrounds and you burn a key on the end chest, you also get double rewards with a seasonal upgrade, which is a really good way to incentivize playing at higher difficulty since you're doubling how much a key is worth. Speaking of that seasonal upgrade, the new upgrade screen is a lot cleaner and less groan-inducing than I imagine Destiny players were used to. I only started playing in Season of the Haunted, and by the time I'd played Haunted, then Plunder, then Seraph, I was already kind of bored of the general 3x7 upgrade grid, especially since some of those upgrades were blatantly there to fill up grid space and not because they actually provided something exciting or useful. Well, the Season of Defiance upgrade screen doesn't have any real symmetry because the only upgrades that exist are things most players would feasibly want. This is another great change. Much like previous seasons, what hasn't changed is that you can focus high stat armor and various seasonal weapons, both to get a weekly red border for crafting, or to randomly roll on a weapon and pray you get a red border for it without the weekly deep sight guarantee. I wouldn't really do this unless it was really close to the end of the season, and you're feeling like you just don't have time to get what you want, because it costs 4 Defiant Engrams to hard focus a seasonal weapon here, which is a bit of a lot, and you'd end up getting a lot of those drops just by playing the Battlegrounds and looting their chests anyway. I don't have much to say about these seasonal weapons, but a lot of them are really fun. Primaries got a buff just a few days ago as of the writing of the script, so even guns I found underwhelming like the Perpetualis auto rifle now feel a lot better than they used to. I do like how they're all Awoken themed, and are half forged of Awoken crystal throughout their frames. They come with a Noble Deeds origin trait whose actual usefulness to me seems questionable, but I appreciate that it's at least themed around a more supportive player fantasy, which Destiny doesn't really do too much of the time. I love my healers. What can I say? They're all such good. Apart from the seasonal weapons, you can also burn 2 engrams to roll on the recovered Leviathan weapons item pool, which will randomly drop you one of 2 things. Either a shotgun or a sword unique to your class. This means you can't focus the shotgun or the sword, and you can't guarantee weekly deep sight on it. That means that this loot pool is the designated engram sink. You'll be burning engram after engram on this if you care about unlocking every pattern for every class, since there is no bad luck protection and no guarantees of personal happiness. We don't play Destiny to be happy, we play it to yearn. Can you feel the yearning yet? I just need one more pattern. Apparently these weapons were in the game a long time ago around the menagerie, but I wasn't yet resurrected by Oracle back then, so I wouldn't know. That said, even if these weapons did exist before, crafting patterns are inherently more valuable than physical weapons because crafting patterns do not consume vault space. The Imperial Decree shotgun has had a good amount of conversation in the player base. It's apparently quite good in PvP. I find aggressive frame shotguns just feel bad in my hands, so I haven't toyed with this or others too much, the only exception being Ragnhild back when 1-2 punch was actually good. If I must use a shotgun in PvP nowadays, I use a sudden death, so I don't really care for the Imperial Decree, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Quite the opposite. It's good enough that there has been strong debate about whether the Trials shotgun Astral Horizon was even worth getting by comparison, but as per a post I found in the Crucible Guidebook subreddit, it seems like the math is just not on Astral's side. The exception is Adept mods, which sure, if you're a fucking demon who wants to squeeze every bit of juice out of the lemon that is PvP build optimization, then yeah, okay, you're gonna get something out of it. But for most players, it seems like a waste of time unless you just really want a reason to play, in which case this certainly is one. With this in mind, Destiny is not a game that is played on a spreadsheet. It's a game that's, to a massive extent, played on feel, and the gun feel of different weapons is enough to be the deciding factor for many players, regardless of what numbers tell you to believe. Some people are just gonna want an Astral Horizon because it feels good to them, and that is something I love about this game. Finding guns that feel pleasant for you specifically is the one category Destiny 2 crushes every other video game on the planet in, objectively and unequivocally. So I will always encourage you to enjoy this part of the game with reckless abandon. Gold Tusk is a hunter sword. It's an arc version of Quickfang. I love Quickfang. I don't love Gold Tusk because it can't vault shots and swords can't reload. This means it doesn't have an elemental AoE perk the way that the other 2 class swords have. It does have chain reaction, so at least it's something, but, you know. It has Vice Stinger, which the other 2 class swords don't on the other hand. That's massive. It functionally means this sword has more ammo than the others do. Gold Tusk doesn't seem any kind of useful or interesting to me right now, even though it's craftable and enhanceable, but maybe in an arc season? I love these weeby-ass one-handed assassin swords, man. They're so sick, they feel so fundamentally huntery, I have no choice but to stan. I looked through Hunter Arc exotics, aspects, and fragments, but even though I really wanted to, I couldn't figure out anything cool to do with this sword. Unlike my crazy Void Blade Assassin playstyle with Quickfang that I uploaded a little bit ago, this sword did make me think about what I could do with that sword though, so it still brought me to an interesting playstyle even if it wasn't with Gold Tusk itself. Throne Cleaver is a Solar Titan sword. I don't play Titans. It has Incandescent, which seems insane on a weapon that you're going to be killing enemies surrounding you within swarms anyway. Death's Razor is a Warlock Void Sword. I don't play Warlocks. It has destabilizing rounds on it. Jesus Lord. The entire reason I love my Quickfang build in Battlegrounds is because of how sick volatile rounds feel on a sword. The fact that this Warlock sword can basically have it up all the time on just the blade itself is kind of silly, so even though destabilizing rounds isn't amazing in general, maybe it's good on a sword? I don't know. There are also 2 story missions to play in Season of Defiance, Jailbreak and Retribution. I'll discuss those more in the context section of this video coming up, but they're reasonably fun, albeit mechanically simple. Narratively, they're a letdown, but we'll get to it. My overall thoughts on the gameplay of Season of Defiance and the many quality of life changes the game brings to players are very positive. Battlegrounds are always a good time, especially as a testing ground for us to get to grips with the new artifact and mod system. Awoken favors give us a fun way to spam abilities in a particular part of the game, sectioned off from the rest of it, with appropriate ad density to reflect how much magic we can throw around in here, as opposed to something like Strikes or Crucible, though ability uptime is still a bit contentious there even without seasonal buffs. I'm really curious to see what Bungie do with the upcoming Season of the Deep, since changes to the seasonal model, its gameplay, and its progression have already taken place, albeit minimally. I want to see what else they do to freshen up the experience. One thing that's going to be huge coming up is the removal of or changes to how power works. In short, with no need to constantly infuse gear or grind pinnacles, I think this liberates the player base from a certain amount of busy work that no one has truly enjoyed doing for a long time now. The season's quality of life updates have been amazing, its gameplay content has been perfectly fine, and it's only in narrative that Destiny is truly suffering right now, in more ways than one, so it's time to talk about that. Season of Defiance and Lightfall are both exercises in dissatisfaction. They each ask questions and really answer nothing, asking players to just trust me bro that future seasons will do something cool to pay off the questions set up here. The section is going to have spoilers for Lightfall and Defiance, so figure out if you want to stay here. I want to make it very clear that I think stories asking for faith that something will be answered later on obviously has precedent in fiction, and it's not even a bad thing. The thing is, most beloved stories, games, or MMOs at least answer major questions inside of the same expansion's campaign, while leaving crumbs or hints at the future in patch quests. Asking for faith in players to answer those later on is totally fine, and even a strong narrative tool for building up anticipation, but answering almost nothing and leaving only questions to the major events ongoing is always going to be unsatisfying, especially if there's nothing in its stead to bolster the narrative experience in the absence of that plot movement. Season of the Risen had things happening in it. Haunted, at the very least, had very interesting character work and serious dealings with trauma and self-acceptance. Plunder was pretty much complete filler, but it sets up Osiris as an agent in Seraph and Beyond, and it came as the second last season of the year, which is the perfect time to be more lax with narrative momentum, given the knowledge crazy things are just around the corner. Defiance has none of that. It is only boring. What makes matters worse is that Defiance was the hope of many players when Lightfall's ending had everyone reacting with a collective, "Wait, what? Okay." Myself and players around me had hope that maybe, just maybe, Bungie were going to do something with the seasonal storyline that would make Lightfall's underwhelming conclusion a little less irritating, a little easier to bear. So we all pointed to that as our savior. Defiance would inject meaning and interesting events into the ongoing story. After all, Bungie did say they were changing the seasonal model and to some degree how they tell stories, so maybe this is the start of that. Totally wrong. Instead, what Defiance does for the overall plot is kick the can down the road without even a hint of something to come. Sure, we know Season of the Deep is a thing, but nothing in-game suggests anything about it. So for players who don't read the TWAB, and let me assure you, many don't, I literally saw people trying to do terminal chest triple dip a few days after it was patched, those players will have even less to go on, even less reason to wonder if something cool is coming. The Shadow Legion take prisoners from the beginning of Season of Defiance, but it's never revealed why. This seems like a major plot point, or at least the beginnings of one, because this is the Witness we're talking about. It doesn't do things for no reason, but it never gets addressed. They're breathing in what's presumably trace amounts of the Witness's dark fetor, but for what purpose, we don't know. The Witness is our major antagonist, and it is essentially absent right now, already a dangerous thing for a story to do. Well, okay, if it's not around, at least we can use its absence to our benefit, right? Trying to find out its plans or what it seeks while it's currently away, and we lack the means to pursue it to where it's gone, would have made some kind of sense, but we're unlucky enough to discover nothing. 2 of the Defiant Battlegrounds take place in pyramids, which is very cool because I love them, and I love fighting inside them, but so much of the dialogue as you play through these makes it obvious that they aren't doing anything obvious to these civilians, that they're in fact being treated reasonably humanely, which means there aren't major stakes, and anything that happens as a result of efforts to rescue everyone feels unsatisfying, and dear God, does something happen as a result of those efforts. Here's where the spoilers begin, so leave now if you haven't played this season or you care about it. When Amanda Holliday's stock was moved to Rahul at the beginning of the season, I called that she was going to die, to each and every single player I knew. It was pretty damn obvious, but I thought that it would at least be set up in a more heroic, emotional, or triumphant manner. This is a character who has been in Destiny for a very long time, and she's someone on our side. That to me warrants a level of narrative handling that just isn't here. In the mid-season mission Jailbreak, she endures great pain to make sure Mizrax and a group of civilians are able to escape a Shadow Legion outpost alive, and she pays for it with her life in a blazing explosion. It's sudden. It's only telegraphed if you squint and really look for it. It feels barely earned, if at all. You can be charitable to the writing, of course, it is possible. You could see the cutscene she has with Crow at the beginning as light foreshadowing, when he worries that when her ship was shot down he'd lost her. After all, she's not a guardian. She tells him there's no room for sentimental talk, and it comes across as Amanda being the kind of person who will push herself hard to save other people, even at danger to herself. Later on, we see in a 2D sketch animatic that her time on the road traveling to the last city with her parents saw her witness much death and suffering, innocent people getting killed, including her family. She has reasons to give it her all for the endangered civilians. In the audio call dialogue she and Crow have after some weekly quest steps, there's tension at their broken romance, Crow struggling with the sorrow of losing her because she can't reconcile their bond with his past self's actions. There's a forlorn sense that they might be together again, someday, she says, but not today. I think if you're any reader or watcher or player of stories, this is the point at which you start to figure out real quick that someday is never going to come. He'd wait for her dutifully, because he deeply cares for her as one of the first people to give him real companionship, and she's going to fall to something, as if he hasn't suffered enough. Crow is my favorite character in this universe, and to say that both he and Amanda deserve better than this is an understatement. It's not just that they're being put through pain and dark times, it's that we've seen it before. It's repetitious at this point, and it's genuinely a bit boring. About the most interesting element of it is that her death acts as a kind of interruption of the healing process they were both going through, and given that Crow recently reintegrated Uldren into himself, you now feel the vengeance and hatred of that Uldren self dripping off of him in cutscenes, aspects of his being he previously lacked access to, but now very much has at his command, surfacing. The player guardian knows all about vengeance and how it doesn't always work out the way you think it's gonna go, which puts the player in a unique position to teach and guide Crow through the times ahead using their own past experiences, because he's unwilling to listen to Mara in matters of the heart. That and him referring to the scouts as my hunters in his determined, angry tone are both pretty sick foreshadowing for his inevitable role in the story, and he probably doesn't even realize he's doing it, but there's just not much else happening here. It's abundantly clear at this point that Bungie are going to do something awesome with Crow, but it's not unfair to say that it is taking approximately forever to get to, and other characters around him are starting to pay for it. Mizrax, Devrim, and Mara, they're part of Season of Defiance too, and some of that good seasonal character work happens with them that's fun to experience if you're any kind of fan of these characters. Mara gets a little bit more of a spotlight on her emotional state and her connection to Crow. She continues to be a character who displays immense wisdom that comes from deep pain, which is something I've always loved about her, and will continue to love about her. Every enlightened phrase that comes out of Mara's mouth, you can tell it's rooted in some kind of distant suffering, whether distant due to time, or distant due to her being secretive and numbing herself to it, so people around her only get hints of her true heart. But speaking of her true heart, there's one character that's noticeably absent from Season of Defiance, and whose absence makes absolutely no sense. Petra Venj. Petra Venj isn't here. We never hear from her. We never talk to her. We don't know what she's doing. The only hint of her we get at all is from some lore on the Royal Executioner fusion rifle, and this to me seems like a wild oversight. I think about it this way. In this season, we're named Queensguard, even as an honorary title. Who else would be a better mentor for us as Queensguard than the actual Queen's Wrath? Not just to teach us, but to make sure we're applying Mara's grace and favor in a respectful way. To me, even as a new player who is missing years of narrative context and only has summaries to work with, I find that if Petra isn't there on Mara, it better be for a damn good reason. To cap everything off, the season ends with a mission to destroy the Shadow Legion flagship and take it out of the sky. To clarify, this is not Callus's personal ship that's in Neomuna, though that one is essentially empty of meaning now too, given that he's dead. It's basically just the same ship that the orbital prison Defiant Battleground takes place in. You can still play that battleground after we blow it up, because video games. And that's it, that's the season finale, unless they add something else a week or two before Deep launches. It's just... a character who's been in Destiny for years suddenly dies, and we get some unsatisfying, empty revenge by knocking a ship out of the sky. It feels hollow, unsatisfying. About the only praise I could really give it is seeing your friends die while wondering what it was all for, and watching your other friends go into a cold, vengeful bitterness seems to be a pretty accurate depiction of war. Let's talk about the story missions now. As far as gameplay is concerned, I don't think they're anything special. It's just their presentation and character dialogue that gives them any kind of power. But when you contrast them against Abhorrent Imperative from Season of the Seraph, they barely even deserve to be scaled against it in terms of enjoyment or meaning. You may think it's unfair to compare the end of a yearly storyline to the opening chapter of a new one, and for a moment I thought so too, but I came to the realization that it's absolutely fair for two reasons. The first reason is that, much like the end of a story arc has a responsibility, so too does the beginning of one. The end of an arc needs to be conclusive and satisfying, to reward the player for following it to its finale, even if that reward is emotional torment and suffering. The beginning of an arc likewise has a responsibility to hook the person experiencing it, to get them intrigued, interested, excited, give them a reason to look forward to staying with it and seeing what happens next. The beginning of an arc failing to do that means that arc is failing that critical responsibility, and this is a responsibility Season of Defiance very much fails. The second reason it's fair to compare them is because the reality is, the comparison is inevitable. I'm sorry, but it just is. Players aren't going to just not think about them side by side, not with this release order, not with this timing. If this was in the middle of the year, there would be space and distance from Season of the Seraph, and so it would be less fresh in the minds of players. But because it's happening immediately after it, it's impossible not to think of how much cooler and more interesting the storyline in Seraph was compared to this, and everything contributes to that. If anything, Season of Defiance had more advantages in its corner, none of which helped it much. It had a raid, and not just a dungeon like Seraph did. Defiance and Lightfall have a bigger, more impactful activity that should carry so much more narrative weight, but it doesn't. Seraph's dungeon directly ties into its seasonal story, maybe not incredibly deeply, but it still has something to do with it, which made it feel like you were still moving with a purpose and doing something important. Lightfall's launch raids narrative seems not to affect the seasonal storyline or too much of the actual Lightfall story either for that matter. It's just a cool face-off against a boss that's been built up for a long time, which was certainly enjoyable and climactic, but the consequences of it are so minimal in the universe. Not even on the level of defeating Roke causing the Scorn to mobilize and become something Guardians then had to start repelling more. We're not even going to bring up the Last Wish and the effects killing an Ahamkara had, not just on the story of Destiny, but the patrol space experience of the Dreaming City. Again, memories of times I wasn't a living Guardian for, so I can only recount what others have told me. The clear of Root of Nightmares doesn't affect Season of Defiance in any way, and doesn't change the shape of the Destiny universe on a day-to-day gameplay level at all. I remind you again, Spire of the Watcher and Season of the Seraph directly link to the seasonal storyline, with dialogue from Osiris, and tying to the Vex with us trying to still find Neomuna in-universe. Season of Defiance's content has nothing like that really, which disappoints me. Season of Defiance launched alongside a campaign which could have done more work to inform the events within it, and vice versa, Season of the Seraph meanwhile was the opposite. It was the sole story that had to do all of the heavy lifting to set up an upcoming campaign in a powerful, satisfying way. A task which I remind you, it achieved with tremendous success. It's just dismaying to see a season that has so many advantages on its side fumbling so hard, when what came immediately before it had such an important and more difficult task ahead of it and knocked it out of the park. Here's hoping Season of the Deep takes all the wonderful quality of life improvements we've seen in Lightfall and Defiance and runs with them to create something more compelling on a narrative level as well. those have been my thoughts on Season of Defiance. I think if one were to look at the narrative of both Lightfall and its accompanying season, they might think Destiny is in trouble, and in terms of storytelling, it's pretty obvious that Bungie are really stretching, trying to do what feels like filling time, stalling, for the more substantial story beats we all hope are still forthcoming. Mechanically, the changes and additions Lightfall brings are worthy enough to help me enjoy the game even more than I was, but if your main anchor to the Destiny universe is its story, you're probably disappointed by the state of things, being told to just wait and trust me bro one more time. Like I said, I hope Season of the Deep does something cool with narrative, and continues changing the game's structure and gameplay to be smoother, more engaging, and less exhausting to participate in. I'll see you all there. As always, thank you for listening, may fog shroud you, may stars light your way, and may the night keep you safe.